Welcome to another episode of Hats Off. It's all about the tiny hats, guys. We left off on 1764. I believe that was when Professor Hoffman actually saw the Phoenix object pass over 1/5 of the sun's surface. And the Royal Society didn't want to introduce it into the minutes, but they had to because he was very prestigious. He also recorded that it came from the north, passed over the ecliptic plane, and disappeared into southern space. No objects had ever been recorded to move like that in the last 3,000 years. But we do have references to Hittite texts that do explain that an object moves exactly in that fashion. This can all be found in Chronicon. We finished in 1764, and we have basically got to the point where the tiny hats and their operations have infiltrated the whole of Europe. Uh, England has already been a captured operation. So we're going to start with 1765, when Britain, which is now heavily influenced vicariously by agents who are subservient to the money bags of the tiny hats, Britain passes the Stamp Act to pay for British troops stationed in the American colonies. It is a very unpopular move. It would be replaced the very following year as Britain grows worried over colonial hostilities. But the levies and the increase in taxes, this was all by design. Much of what we've been told about the American Revolution, while on the surface it is true, behind the scenes it was an operation to create a new Atlantis of Bacon, to create a land of refuge, like the Israelite cities of refuge. It was specifically designed as a Freemason enterprise. We already know the Jews created Freemasonry in order to infiltrate the aristocracy of Europe. And it worked. It worked so well, they ended up taking over the Vatican as well, and popes started wearing tiny hats. So that was 1765. The 13 colonies are in full bloom, and more Europeans are leaving the Anglo-Saxon and German world and relocating by ship to the Americas. 2 years later, 1767, the navigator Wallace in his ship titled the Dolphin stopped by a giant island in the Pacific called Tahiti. He is possibly the very first, or maybe the second, it's disputed, European to ever touch down in Tahiti. Tahiti now becomes a landing zone. It now becomes a center of focus. It is a place of amazement. It is a garden paradise, something like 40 or 50,000 indigenous people. And by the time his ship lands back in Europe, word spreads about Tahiti. It's a whole new world to be explored. Suddenly Polynesia, Micronesia, Melanesia, Oceania, Pacifica, they become the subject matter to romance and books all over Europe and the Americas. A year later, 1768. This is interesting in the calendrics. Maybe more has happened than I've recorded, but in 1768, a meteor burns across the sky of North America. It is seen by everyone. It is clearly visible to all. It's visible for a full 20 seconds, which pretty much removes the standard model of a meteorite. The Shawnee Indians call it Panther Passing Across. They named it. 20 seconds is a long time for something to hang in the sky. So, the Shawnee Indians also knew that Panther Passing Across was the name that the Great Spirit wanted a child to be called, who was born at that exact moment when Panther Passing Across was passing over the sky. Now, history records this Native American's name. as Tecumseh. You guys know the story of Tecumseh? He's a man who would become a mighty warrior and leader of several Native American peoples in their territorial struggle against the colonial Europeans who were rapidly expanding their own holdings. So Tecumseh would die by treachery of his brother, who was called the Prophet. It's all rather interesting. So astronomer Horrible reported an observation of a light, a luminary, not a star, that was orbiting Venus. This astronomer was studying Venus in this year of 1768, and he saw that there was a smaller light that was going around Venus. He called it Neith. So this was reported also by M. Haziel of the Brussels Observatory. Also in this year, the navigator Bougainville in Labadus, I believe, stopped by Tahiti. He was the second or the third European to do so. He compared Tahiti to the Garden of Eden and named it New Cythera after the Peloponnesian island in the Mediterranean Sea. So also in 1768, the very famous Captain Cook set out from England on his first Pacific voyage. A lot of people were heading toward Tahiti now. His famous ship was the Endeavour, Captain Cook's ship. Now, Cook was not of the nobility. He was the son of a Yorkshire laborer, but he would gain the attentions and respect of the Admiralty of the Crown. His voyage would last 3 years. He would land in Tahiti, New Zealand, and Australia. It's really interesting. 1768. Don't really know exactly super major events that happened that time. Maybe I missed some. I could go deeper, or you can. But it doesn't escape me that 1768 was 20 years since Rome's founding in 753 BC. Rome was founded in 753 BC. 2,520 years is 360 years 7 times over. This is proven in the prophecy in the book of Daniel. Mean, Tekel Apartian. It also equals 2,520. It is a prophetic code. We've seen this countdown several times of 2,520 years. It's 7 times. A time is 360 years or 360 days. It all depends on the context. So 1768, see, it has something to do with Rome or Italy. So I would not be surprised to find out some type of major news or Vatican history that I missed that happened in 1768. Somebody else can find it. But this year happens to also be 1242 Anno Domini, reinforcing the calendrics. And what I mean is the Anno Domini calendar was implemented by the Roman Catholic Church, by agents of the Roman Catholic Church to hide the Phoenix phenomenon. I have published this data extensively. 1242 is a Phoenix number. It's divisible by 138. 138 times 9. So, yeah, in the calendrics, we find that 1768 is specifically attached to acts or an act or something that has something to do with the Roman Catholic Church and the Vatican. I don't know. Let's see. The following year, 1769, the Royal Society of London sent out scientists aboard ships to points all over the world to view a phenomenon called the transit of Venus. Now, they watched this through their telescopes from points all over the world. The first time scientists observed the transit of Venus was in the year 1639. So Venus appears as a tiny dot against the background of the gigantic solar disk. On April 13th, Captain Cook anchored the Endeavour at Matavai Bay, Tahiti, spending 3 months on the island with the people. He was the first European to stay for such a long period and to make meteorological observations, to observe he also observed, he had his walking papers too. From Tahiti, he observed the transit of Venus, and he also charted the coast. He gave us our first map of Tahiti. Tahiti was now the praise of Europe. Everybody wanted to know about it. A tiny mountainous island in the vast Pacific, covered in thick tropical trees, groves of coconut and breadfruit trees, flowers and fruit growing everywhere, yams, bananas, and sugarcane grew wild, fresh water in abundance, fish, fowls, little pigs, and no snakes or dangerous animals on Tahiti. It was the center of Polynesian culture, hundreds of little islands, but it was the largest of a small collection of islands. Now, at the arrival of Captain Cook, the Tahitians numbered about 40,000 people. The men were tall and well proportioned, black eyes with long straight hair, golden brown skin. They were very oriental. Their women were noted for their beauty. The English noted the perfect teeth of the Polynesians. They lived in a paradise with no winter, in huts with no walls, in communities with no villages. They kept no records of the past and were in youth very sexually promiscuous, but in adulthood they married and then remained monogamous. So they got all that shit out while they were in their youth. They didn't suppress it. It's very interesting. In the following year, 1770 AD, contentions between Boston rope makers and British redcoats quartered in the city led to the Boston Massacre. Though it was not exactly a full-fledged massacre, the event spread through the colonies involving hostility and outrage against England, paving the way for the War of Independence. Britain by this time had agreed to lift many of the duties and taxes imposed on the colonials, but secretive groups like the Sons of Liberty and Masons deliberately sabotaged relations between Britain and the American colonies. The will to break away from England was already strong. But who was behind financing all of this? Also in 1770, Mayor Amschel Rothschild drafted up the documents for the publication of the Illuminati program, only for select members, and entrusted these materials into the care of one named Adam Weishaupt. Rothschild is indirectly connected to the Illuminati conspiracy for one world government by a select body of men rather than any national government. Rothschild's brainchild is that he financed this operation and continues to do so today. For those who do not know, the Rothschilds also bank with the Vatican. So Captain Cook, in 1770, aboard the Endeavour, arrives at the coast of Australia on April 19th, seeing 5 Aborigines, observing them from the coast on the 22nd. Anchoring at Botany Bay, Cook's men found enormous quantities of fish, giant oysters, and other shellfish. The botanists found trees and plants that had never before been described, avians in spectacular colors and variety, and very strange, elusive animals. We know what they are today. They're marsupials. They explored, Captain Cook and his men explored 2,000 odd miles of Australia's eastern seaboard. It is then that they realized that they had discovered a supercontinent. So 1770 is interesting in that it's a very popular Israelite number, 1244 Anno Domini. It's also 2700 even of the divided kingdom chronology between the division between Israel and Judah, when Israel basically divorced Judah from the Israelite family. 2700 years is 900 years, the number of judgment times 3. 2 years later in 1772. Another, in the calendrics, this is another very, very interesting. This is 2484 years, which is divisible by 138. It's a Phoenix phenomenon number after 713 BC, when the dark satellite altered the year from 360 days to 365.24 days a year. It's exactly 2484 years. This is the number of Aristarchus, 2484 years. In this year of 1772, Johann Bode popularized the Titius-Bode law of planetary distances from the surface of the sun, which provided astronomers a frame of reference by which they could search the heavens for more planets belonging to the system. This search for more planetary bodies would lead to the 1801 discovery of the asteroid belt between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, exactly where the Titius-Bode law predicted an object to be. In the American colonies, John Adams' brother, named Samuel Adams, founded the Committee of Correspondence, a network that connected writers to the colonies who were driven with the agenda of breaking away from Britain, publishing a storm of letters, tracts, and editorials. Through the intercolonial press, the colonies became more and more American and less British. You have to understand the importance of the Committee of Correspondence. What is actually being done here is treason, and yet the British didn't come in here and arrest these people immediately. Russia sets the pale of settlement, forcing the Jews to relocate back to the countries they had originally been in before moving to Russia. Jewish infiltration of Russian society and government through financial practices had led to a series of clashes, and the Russian government sought to end this by ridding themselves of the foreign elements, the Jews. The Jews would exact their vengeance on the Russian people in a most terrible way. Most of you listening to my voice probably would never believe what happened to 22 million white Russian Christians at the hands of the Jewish Bolsheviks. If I was to go into detail as to the type of tortures and torture for sport that was done over a 5.5 year period, you wouldn't believe me. You wouldn't believe me at all. The rest of Russia got in line real quick, became an atheist state, and you know it as the USSR. And then the international Jews used the Russian state. We're going to get into all this in the Tiny Hats, in the Hats Off series. But they used it to initiate the Cold War. The entire Cold War were nationalist Jews and internationalist Jews working together to fleece the economies of nations. That's what the Cold War was about. Captain Cook set out on his second voyage from England to the Pacific in the Resolution and Adventure. Two more vessels, formerly named the Drake and the Raleigh. But these ships were very hated by Spain. So with the English challenging Spain's Pacific claims, the Admiralty changed the name so as not to provoke them any further. Probably a wise decision. In the following year, 1773, which is exactly 333 years before the return of the chief cornerstone and what we know of is Armageddon. 1773, American colonials staged the Boston Tea Party. It is entirely staged. This was explained away as a protest against the British tea tax, throwing away 342 chests of tea into the harbor. The event was calculated to ensure that Britain would respond harshly. War was already sought, and now the colonials were searching for pretexts. The writings of Samuel Adams popularized the protest, and this led to a stronger spirit of oneness among the colonials. 9 days later, 700 more chests of tea were dumped at Delaware, But this was barely even noticed. The torch of rebellion had already been lit. In this same year of 1773, Britain in London established the stock exchange. Remember, Rothschild is already in power. English Captain James Cook made the first recorded landings in Antarctica. The monarchical families of Europe launch attacks against the papacy due to the meddling of the Jesuits in political affairs. And on July 21st, the Pope ended the Jesuit order. Jesuit order. The tiny hats have already infiltrated the Vatican. What the monarchical families of Europe, the elite have a problem with all these Jesuit priests actually being deep state intelligence operatives. That's what the real problem was here, under the guise of the Roman Catholic Church. So in this year of 1773, James Bruce, a Scotsman, ventured into Africa and discovered among the Ethiopian Christians who claim Hebrew descent through King Menelik I, son of the Queen of Sheba and Solomon, whose real name was Jedediah, a lost copy of the Book of Enoch. As with the early Christian movement, the Book of Enoch was originally a part of the canon. Interestingly, the ancient book declares that it would be discovered in the last days and translated into the known languages of the world. The Book of Enoch says that. So James Bruce was one of the tallest men on record at the time. He was a descendant of Robert the Bruce of Scotland, of Bannockburn, the Battle of Bannockburn fame, where it is rumored that he was joined by a massive cavalry. And at the time, the only cavalry that could have joined him in Scotland were the Templars by ship. So that was 1314 AD, the Battle of Bannockburn, where the Scots actually fended off the English because a mystery cavalry appeared. Bruce was aware of the existence of the Book of Enoch from the book titled Chronographia in the year 808 by George Syncellus. Now, Bruce returned from Ethiopia with 3 copies of the Ethiopic Enoch. In the month of May 1773, the Shawnee chief, Blackfish, told Thomas Bullitt that the lands of Kentucky was not theirs to give away, that it did not belong to any Indians, that Kentucky, that's the Indian name for Kentucky, it's Kentucky, belongs to the murdered ghosts of the murdered Asgens. Now, this Indian explained that these had been a white people from the Eastern Sea. And the chief Blackfish described a war when his own Indian ancestors had killed off white people on every hill and in every valley in the land that had come to be called Kentucky. Yeah, we'll be getting into an old book from 1834 I have in my possession about the Aboriginal histories of Kentucky. On January 17th, Captain Cook crossed the Antarctic Circle, the first ships to have done so in known history. But they couldn't have been. The Piri-Reis maps show Antarctica fully mapped without any ice. So this tells us that by 1773, there still has not been a return of a vapor canopy. The Piri-Reis maps, 1419, something like that, the vapor canopy must have collapsed. The last vapor canopy must have collapsed prior to the 15th, 14th century BC. Excuse me, I'm sorry, AD. Yeah, 700 or 800 years ago. So Captain Cook crossed the Antarctic Circle, and As he was again making history in the frozen South, far to the north in England, Captain Cook's first Pacific voyage to Tahiti in Australia was published, and it instantly became a rage in a book written by Hawkesworth. It was reprinted twice in 1773 with an edition published in America, followed by translations in French, German, Italian, and other anchorages. 1774, the next year, the British passed the Intolerable Acts, as they were called by the colonials. The British sieged Boston, invading the city and closing the harbor. Martial law is declared in Boston, and British troops are forcefully quartered in the homes of the colonials. The Americans throughout all the colonies are enraged, and the seeds of rebellion grow throughout the population as supplies and food are secretly smuggled into Boston to help the colonials. The First Continental Congress elects George Washington as its head. 33rd degree Mason becomes the leader of the 13 colonies that seek to be independent of England. Who's really bankrolling all of this? Captain Cook sailed a route in 1774, believed to have never been sailed before, to the island of Tierra del Fuego, South Georgia, and the Sandwich Group Islands in the Antarctic, surprisingly discovering vast schools of whales, whole colonies of seals in the thousands, sea cows, sea lions, innumerous penguins, and masses of geese, the giant albatross, and seabirds of every kind. That the cold sea supported such a wealth of marine life was unbelievable to the English. Alan Moorhead in 1966 wrote, Captain Cook had stumbled upon what was probably the largest concentration of wildlife that existed in the entire world, and he was the first man to let the world know of its existence. It was a mystery to find such vitality in so remote a frozen vast. Sponges, vast schools of krill, 100-foot-long blue whales, right whales, humpback, and killer whales. This is a massive amount of food source that Captain Cook reported back to England, and it would forever change the Antarctic exploration. In the following year of 1775, as the British troops began advancing to destroy the colonial arsenals, the militias, Paul Revere and William Dawes by horseback rode to alert the Patriots in the towns through which the Redcoats were traveling. This famous nighttime ride was on April 18th. This is the 108th day of the year. In Chronicon, I've shown you many famous events were on the 108th day of the year. The Continental Congress established Semper Fi, a group of fighting men aboard all naval vessels who are now known as the U.S. Marine Corps. It is now believed that the famous name Paul Revere was just an invention of Longfellow, and that the man's real name was Dr. Samuel Prescott. 1 year later, 1776. The calendrics for this year are off the chart. 1776, the 13 colonies declare their independence. It is exactly 33 times 10, 330 years before the return of the chief cornerstone upon the monument of man. It is 330 years before Armageddon, the great battle. 1776 is 5814 years since the capture flood, the first appearance of the moon in 4039 BC. 5814 is exactly how many pyramid inches in height the Great Pyramid is when the cornerstone is set in place. As I've shown you guys, the Great Pyramid is exactly 5,448 inches high today. Well, when the cornerstone is in place, which is 366 pyramid inches in height, the cornerstone alone, upon the monument of man, the full geometrical height of the Great Pyramid, the top of the cornerstone is 5814. This is also 3182 years since Israel was established in Canaan in the year 1407 BC, after the conquest of Canaan. 3182 year of Israel is interesting because the year 713 BC, when the year changed from 360 days to 365.24 days, was also the year 3182 Annus Mundi. This is a cross-calendrical parallel. It just shows the absolute importance of this year. It is also 2520 years, mean, tekel, apartion. Weighed, numbered, divided in the book of Daniel to the king Nebuchadnezzar. 2,520 years since the Israelites were taken into Babylonian captivity in 745 BC. 2,520 years is 360 times 7. This is also 1,700 years, 34 jubilees of the Saka calendar. It's an ancient Israelite calendar of India. It's also the 1,300th year since the fall of Rome, when the 10 European Israelite descended nations came together under Odovacar the German and defeated Rome in 476 AD. This is 13 centuries after the fall of Rome, when the 13 colonies founded by the descendants of Israel declare their independence from. This is when Ephraim, the last days Israelite empire of adoption, declares its independence from Manasseh, which is Great Britain. In this year of 1776, on May 1st, the Illuminati is officially begun. A wide-scale plan for the cabal of international financing, a cabal that let me say that a different way. It's basically a wide-scale plan for a cabal of international financiers, bankers, to divide and conquer Europe, and by extension, the world's countries, by financing both sides of all major conflicts and wars that they themselves would influence and profit from, growing rich off the interest from opposing fronts. Not only would this gain them immeasurable wealth, but it would allow Mayor Amschel Rothschild and the Jewish elite, it would allow the Jews to weaken and depopulate any Israelite descended European nations that seemingly get too powerful. This was a way for them to this is a way for the Jews, which did not have an army, to actually use the banks to fund armies in order to subdue Israelite descended peoples. Mayor Amschel Rothschild has control of the Illuminati through his agent Adam Weishaupt. Weishaupt publicized the beginning of the Bavarian Illuminati in this year of 1776, a premeditated shallow facade of the true order of the illumined ones. He was a professor of canon law at Ingolstadt University in Germany, as well as a Jesuit priest who believed in the return of the Luciferian society. Remember, the Vatican had already been exposed. Therefore, the Vatican abolished the Jesuits. Why? Because it was a way to get Europeans to lower their guard. The agents of the Jesuits are recalled back to the Vatican. Why? Because the kingdom of darkness has now taken on a new, it's a chameleon. It is now taken on a new front. Now the evildoers aren't Jesuits. They are, but they're not publicized as so. Now they're agents of the Illuminati, and they're infiltrating all the secret societies and all the fraternal benefit societies, like the Elks and the Moose and the Archer guilds, the shipping guilds, the Freemasons. So Adam Weishaupt, his chapter was specifically started with a deceptive intent to have it publicly destroyed, to distract the public into believing that the order itself was no more. It's the same thing that the Vatican, which is controlled by the Jews, the Rothschilds, did with the Jesuit order. Publicly condemn their own order and then disband it. It's the same thing here. The Illuminati truly began in 1776, but a second Illuminati front was set up to take a fall so that the real Illuminati can work undeterred. This is what Adam Weishaupt's role was for Amherst Rothschild. The Illuminati structure is based on 13 royal families who all trace their lineages back several centuries. Families that have taken an oath to the Antichrist that he will sit on the throne. Now, George Washington, a leading Mason in the American colonies, publicly warned the new Americans about the existence of the Illuminati agents of the subversive movement later when he was made the President of the United States. Though the American Revolutionary War began a year earlier in 1775, the founding fathers of the United States signed the Declaration of Independence in the year 1776, officially creating the United States of America. The 13 colonies united together in war, becoming 13 states of the most powerful nation this world has ever experienced. The British General Howe attacked New York City with more than 30,000 troops with German auxiliaries on July 2nd, capturing Long Island and driving away George Washington's tired and underfed army, but the colonies did not surrender. The British deserter John Paul Jones captained the very first American warship, the Alfred, flying the Grand Union Jack. After attacking Nassau, he was appointed over the Providence, it's a ship, in May, and he joined the official Continental Navy, destroying British fisheries in Nova Scotia and capturing 16 British prize ships, including the British whaler Britannia. Several heavy warships fell to the famous John Paul Jones. The American Navy was begun with piracy. The nations of Europe were in awe of the news passing over the Atlantic from North America. Everybody was paying attention to the newspapers. George Washington literally stalemated the most powerful army in the modern world with an unprofessional army who lacked necessary winter gear, clothes, were always short of food and ammunition, and were held together more by a strong belief rather than a pressing need. Historian H.G. Wells wrote, quote, "The growth of the United States is a progress that has no precedent in the world's history. It is a new kind of occurrence. Such a community could not have come into existence before. The great community of the United States is an altogether new thing in history. There have been great empires before, with populations exceeding 100 million, but these were associations of divergent peoples. There has never been one single people on this scale before." By the year's end, the Continental Congress had commissioned 13,000 privateers. Many formerly had been pirates. They had received their letters of pardon and letters of marque. to harass and attack all British shipping. With these 175 ships and about 2,000 cannons, the privateers of America succeeded in sinking or capturing 559 English vessels, the confiscated goods sent to George Washington's army. There are two fundamental characteristics about the people who founded the United States. They were Anglo-Saxons, or more properly described, they were Anglo-Celtic people. These were the people of Germanic, Celtic, and Gallic stock, and were people unified in their faith, a belief in a future resurrection, a belief in a savior, in divine redemption obtainable through belief in a modification of personal behavior. This Christianity led to the founding of the United States, was in fact the very revival of ancient Israelite faith. Europe was peopled by waves of migrations from the Baltic and Mediterranean that are shown clearly in Chronicon to have all come from Samaria, the capital of ancient Israel in Lower Syria, which was also the origin of Christianity, in Galilee. In the 7th and 6th centuries BC, these Israelite migrants were known to the other nations in the Near East and Aegean by their city of origin, Samaria, for they were universally known as Sumerians. The culture that founded the United States was a spiritual people, the Bible being found in nearly every cottage and house in the 13 colonies. Throughout the colonies, Benjamin Franklin's 13 virtues were widely popularized and aspired by the youth of the new nation. It was a dream of Thomas Jefferson and other founders of the nation to establish an Anglo-Saxon Renaissance, and by extension, an Israelite Renaissance. It was these men who discovered that the long history of the Anglo-Saxon common law was remarkably similar to those of the ancient Israelites. The original seal of the United States was to depict on one side the Israelites following God's pillar of fire out of Egypt, and the obverse of the Great Seal were to be depicted the Anglo-Saxon leaders, Hengist and Horsa. These men were Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin. They are the designers of the first seal of the United States of America. It was a seal that recognized Israelite pedigree. The American Revolution was in all respects also a Christian revolution. The timing of the start of the United States links it with ancient Israel's start of migration. Israel was predicted to depart from the land and cross across the earth. In the Old Testament, we find that Israel would be a nation and a company of nations in Genesis chapter 35, verse 11. That Abraham's seed shall be as numerous as the sands of the sea and shall spread across the west, and to the east, to the north, and to the south. Genesis 28, 14 through 15. Isaiah the prophet wrote that the outcasts of Israel would be spread across the face of the earth and would be the dispersed of Judah. In Isaiah chapter 11, verse 11 through 13. There are two sets of prophecies here. The dispersed of Judah were not promised any nations or empires. They were promised to rule. The descendants of Israel were promised to become mighty nations throughout the world, to occupy the coasts and islands of the world, to become God's weapon of war, to emerge as the world's greatest empires. These are two separate prophecies given to two separate groups. These prophecies distinguish the Israelites from the Jews. Isaiah said that the Israelites would be scattered to the ends of the earth, and that in this way, God would increase his people because geographically it cannot be done in the small strip that is called Israel today. This is Isaiah 26:15. The prophet Zechariah wrote that the descendants of Israel will remember God in far-off countries. Zechariah 10:7 through 11. The psalmist of the Old Testament wrote that Israel was to receive as its inheritance the uttermost parts of the earth for a possession. In other references, the uttermost parts of the earth is always a reference to the far west, which in the Greek later became the far west, the Tartar west, the Tartar west. Tartarus, and Tartaria are literally the same thing. It is indicative of a people from the east who would inherit a nation or an empire in the west. That's where these words come from, both Tartaria and Tartaros. This is Psalms 2:8. Even the apostles in the New Testament books addressed their letters to the Israelites who were, in James 1:1, they were scattered abroad. It was already known in the days of Jesus that the descendants of Israel were already scattered all over Europe. It was already known. It was prophesied that in the course of their migrations, the Israelites would forget who they are. The prophet Isaiah wrote, "For the Lord hath poured out upon you the spirit of a deep sleep, and hath closed your eyes." Isaiah 29:10. Also in Isaiah, God says, "I will bring the blind," that's Israel, I will bring the blind by a way that they know not. I will lead them on paths they have not known. Isaiah 42:16. In the book of Romans in the New Testament, it declares that that blindness in part has happened to Israel. The tribe of adoption was Joseph's, carried through the blessings of Jacob to his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born of Egypt. In my Dark Scriptures playlist, I have two videos, the start of a series called Born of Egypt. It is about the beginning of the Israelite migrations from Egypt. So these two patriarchs, Ephraim and Manasseh, were prophesied to have descendants that would establish the mightiest Israelite empires this world would ever know. And these were the British Empire, Manasseh, and the United States, Ephraim. Manasseh means forgetful, but Ephraim means doubly fruitful. The Old Testament prophets declared that the Israelites would migrate to the very ends of the earth. Again, Tartaros, Tartaria. That's what this means. To the uttermost end, to the far, far west. Tartar, west, is absolutely implicit of the farthest west. Remember, this is from the perspective of the Near East. The Israelites would migrate to the isles that are afar off, Isaiah 66:19, and to the island and coasts to the far north and to the west, Isaiah chapter 49, verses 1 through 3. The descendants of Israel in the last days will occupy the far north and the far west. This is from the perspective of where the prophets lived when they prophesied these things in the Near East. The United States as Ephraim was actually prophesied in the Old Testament. His glory is like the firstling, the calf, of his bullock, and his horns are like the horns of unicorns. With them he shall push the people together to the ends of the earth. Deuteronomy 33:17. In the mindset of antiquity, the ends of the earth is where the sun set. And when the biblical authors make this statement, they are always referring to the far west. The unicorn is one of the primary heraldic motifs of Great Britain. or England, the land of the Angles. The old Hebrew word for calf, firstling, was Engel. The unicorn was the ancient crest of the kings of Israel. Yeah, guys, when you see in those Renaissance pictures and those awesome paintings in the alchemical treatises, when you go through the old magical books of Europe and you see people wearing unicorn horns and you see all that stuff, those are direct references to the authors or the illustrators understanding that the people that they're depicting are the blood descendants of royal Israelites. Remember that. So the unicorn was the ancient crest of the kings of Israel. The Americans inherited a vast continental land that was only sparsely populated with warring tribes of Native Americans. The American expansion into the West also is without historical precedent, for the Anglo-Celts led the march, but were quickly followed by millions of other Europeans also all descended from the 13 tribes of Israel. In the year 745 BC, the 10 tribes of Israel were forcibly deported out of Israel by the Assyrians. An event well documented in both biblical and secular history and verified extensively in the archaeological records as I show in Chronicon, and you can verify for yourself from many different records. 745 BC began the Israelite migrations and the fulfillment of hundreds of biblical prophecies. It also began the 25-20 years to 1776 AD. 25-20 years. Mean, tekel, apartion, weighed, numbered, divided. This is the prophecy in the book of Daniel concerning the Babylon. It was the Babylonian Assyrian authorities that deported the Israelites, but it actually initiated the prophecies about these people and who they would become. 360 times 7, or 7 years 360 times is 2,520 years. From the collapse of the kingdom of Israel to the reestablishment of an Israelite empire that would last until the return of the chief cornerstone. This is the United States. The Puritans landed at Plymouth Rock in the year 1620, exactly 156 years earlier, or 144 times 13 months before 1776. The 13 colonies of the 13 colonies of England becoming the 13 states of the United States shadow the 13 tribes of Israel, but they are themselves in North America, foreshadowed by the 13 clans of the Maya, who believed that their rulers got their authority from the 13 heavens, and they believed that the dead passed into the 13 hells. 13 is the number for America. For the old world of Africa, Asia, and Europe is zoned out by the ancients in 12 zones. The 13th zone is in the opposite hemisphere. It is the Americas. The United States. The United States was founded in 1776, 1,300 years after the fall of Rome in 476 AD. Rome fell to the German ancestors of the Anglo-Saxons, the forefathers of the English. The USA adopted Latin as the language of the courts, the scientific and medical vernaculars, and even copied much of its system of government in the form of republicanism. It is not a coincidence, but providence, that in 1776, Edward Gibbon, the famed English historian, published his epic Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, a masterpiece of literature and history unrivaled today in several volumes. Gibbon's work literally chronicles what the Israelite descended nations were doing for over 1,000 years of history. Without them even knowing, because they were Manasseh, they were forgetful. They didn't even know who they were anymore. Of further significance is that in 1776, Adam Smith in the same year published Wealth of Nations, long considered the Bible of international commerce, a text that taught the governments of the world the benefits of commercialism and capitalism in international trade. Approximately 2.5 million people were in North America's 13 colonies, now 13 states in 1776. More than 99% of the population of the 13 states of America were Anglo-Saxon Christian Protestants. Of these 2.5 million people, only 2.5% were Jewish. But that's a very large population for the time. In this year of 1776, Captain Cook gave the Polynesians at Tonga in the Friendly Island a giant male tortoise that he had found from the Galapagos Islands. Galapagos Islands. I can't ever pronounce that. They protected the tortoise in the Queen's Garden. This is an amazing story. Captain Cook's men found this giant tortoise on these islands, took it to Tonga and gave it to the indigenous people of the Friendly Islands. Gave them the turtle because they didn't want to keep it on the ship anymore. This giant turtle was documented to live 193 more years and did not die until 1966. This is very well documented. The turtle lived for 200 years at least. We don't know how old the turtle was when Captain Cook's men found it. Remember, remember about vapor canopy, guys. Vapor canopy ecology. Although there hasn't been a vapor canopy, under vapor canopy conditions, reptiles and amphibians live almost forever and they grow to astonishing sizes. So, vapor canopy conditions are semi-replicated in the equatorial zone where these islands are. Captain Cook now sets out on his third voyage in the two ships, the Resolution and the Discovery, to the North Polar Seas in search of a North Atlantic Pacific sea route. This man went from Antarctica to the Arctic. And finally, in 1776, the British occupied New York City when a fire, causes unknown, destroyed much of the Dutch architecture. Remember, it was the Dutch who obtained Manhattan Island in 1626, a phoenix year on the 138-year period, exactly when the Dutch acquired New Amsterdam, which later became New York, from the Manhattan Indians. When the Dutch acquired that in 1626, in the month of May, that started a cursed earth period to the total destruction of New York City. 414 years later is May 2040. For those of you who have been paying attention to my research, nothing else needs to be said. The next year, 1777, a French astronomer reported black unknown objects passing over the face of the sun. And as the British advanced upon the city of Philadelphia in the new United States of America, the local patriots relocated the Liberty Bell and concealed it until the British departed. In this year, the United States Congress purchased 20,000 Bibles from Europe to be resold to the American people. Imagine that. Imagine that. The founding fathers of the United States were almost all Christians, aside from Thomas Paine and a few others. But imagine that. Imagine having so much faith that your leaders are spending money that could be allocated for the wartime effort. They're spending money to acquire Bibles in the middle of a war for independence. 1778. Captain John Paul Jones sailed to France and then to Scotland and England in the ship titled Ranger, capturing a British warship named Drake off the coast of Ireland. Flying the American flag, this was the first time foreign government recognized the Stars and Stripes. France now entered the American War of Independence, aiding the colonies against Britain. The French Navy under Admiral Joseph de Grasse won a great naval battle against the British at Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook, wow. One of the very few French naval victories over England. The United States adopts as its Great Seal the Great Pyramid and Eye icon, first depicted upon the $50 colonial note. Also on the Great Seal was a depiction of the Phoenix, the voice of Benjamin Franklin, who believed that this was the choice of Benjamin Franklin, who believed that the Great Seal was a depiction. Well, actually, he says that he actually believed that the eagle was a terrible choice. It was a bad choice. So he chose the phoenix. The eagle was an unclean bird and of evil disposition, but the phoenix was holy. So prominent was the phoenix ideal in early American minds that the very first American steamship put to sea vessel was called the Phoenix, from Hoboken, New York to Philadelphia, right after the turn of the 19th century. In this year, the French mourned the death of Francois-Marie Aurore, better known as Voltaire. So we're moving right along to 1779. Spain entered the American War against Britain. That's now the French and the Spanish siding with the newly formed United States in the hope of gaining back some of their colonial holdings abroad. By 1780, Spain and France had put over 120 warships into action for the American cause. John Paul Jones captured 17 British merchantmen and happened upon a convoy of vessels guarded by the HMS Serapis and the Countess of Scarborough while he sailed the Poor Richard. Jones exchanged fire with 2 warships and won. The British captain had called out to Jones, and John Paul Jones answered in what became the famous American war slogan, "I have not yet begun to fight." That's great. You guys can tell I got that spirit of patriotism. So in the 3rd year of his voyage, Captain Cook was killed by the natives of Hawaii. His men aboard the Resolution returned to England with all of his memoirs and his maps. The following year, 1780, tired of British abuses at sea and still angry at losing New Amsterdam to the British, now called New York, the Dutch of Holland joined Denmark, Sweden, Portugal, and Russia in the League of Armed Neutrality, an agreement to fire on British ships rather than allowing them to board. Previously, because of British naval superiority, European nations submitted to the practice of boarding. In A Patriot's History of the United States, L. Schweikart and M. Allen wrote, quote, "In an amazing display of diplomatic ineptitude, Britain had managed to unite all of the major navies of the world against its quest to blockade a group of colonies that lacked a navy of their own." unquote. This year is exactly 50 jubilees, 2,500 years, after the last of the 10 tribes of Israel were forcibly deported out of the land and into Assyria and its frontiers in the Phoenix year of 721 BC, when Phoenix darkened the sun, as I've shown in Chronicon and my other published books. When looked at over the course of millennia, the entire American Revolutionary War was in essence an Israelite civil war, with its youngest tribe emerging powerfully on the world scene. And with the aid of Captain Cook's charts from his first South Pacific voyage, the whaling fleets set out from Le Havre in France, Hull in England, New Bedford and Nantucket in North America. In the space of 50 years to 1830, tens of millions of fur seals, sea lions, sea elephants, and whales were slaughtered for their fur, bones, and oil. Single ships reportedly killing as many as 9,000 seals in 3 weeks. The once flourishing Antarctic paradise was destroyed. The year is 1782. It is 324 years before Armageddon. The year 2106, the return of the chief cornerstone. 324 years is 108 times 3. The Great Seal of the United States, is designed by George Washington, was of the phoenix under 13 stars in the form of the Star of David, with an olive branch of 13 arrows. You have to understand, that was very, very Jewish. And the founding fathers decided to change it to disguise the Jewish origin of the United States of America. As far as bankrolling the rebellion, this was redesigned by William Barton, and it was a phoenix in flames on one side of the Great Pyramid and the all-seeing eye of Providence in the pyramid on the other. It would not be changed for precisely 120 years. In the year 1902, a phoenix year, the exact year Phoenix was recorded, mentioned by Nostradamus, mentioned by David Ovason, mentioned by Caesar Ramadi, the Dark Age of 1902 mentioned by Charles Fort, when hundreds of millions of tons of red mud and red dust and red rain fell upon our world, very widely documented. The olive branch and the 13 arrows are ancient Israelite symbols. At this time, the people of the infant United States believed that the birth of their new nation in North America was by divine inspiration. 2 particular passages in the Old Testament were believed to refer directly to themselves. Jeremiah 16:13 reads, "I will cast you out of this land and into a land that thou knowest not, neither ye nor your fathers." Also, Deuteronomy 7:6, which reads, "For thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, above all people that are upon the face of the earth." In 1782 was the last known public execution of a witch, and this was in Switzerland. That's pretty interesting. Maybe it was the last public execution of a witch in Switzerland, because we had other public executions in the 1800s. 1783. After 7 years of intense fighting, the American Revolutionary War of the 13 states against Britain is over with the Treaty of Paris, after American and French forces laid siege to Yorktown, compelling British General Cornwallis to surrender. The fight for independence began in 1775. A truly unique situation for the United States was a nation born before it secured its right to exist by war. That is very interesting. 1784. Adam Weishaupt employs the same strategy used by Mayor Amschel Rothschild. He gets another man named Xavier Zwock between himself and the Illuminati conspiracy. Maybe his name is Zwack. Zwack possesses a book containing the elaborate plans of Weishaupt on the planned French Revolution. Bavarian authorities intercept the book when the courier is struck by lightning on his way to Paris. The Bavarian police raid Weishaupt's lodges and the homes of influential associates. I'm telling you now, guys, I don't believe that narrative. I do not believe that lightning struck somebody, and this is why the Bavarian officials received a copy of the book. I believe it's all set up. This was to expose the Illuminati and then have it seemingly brought down by the authorities when actually the true Illuminati is getting through the gates. Just like all the cartels, when they send a whole van or a truckload of cocaine or some other drug through the border, somewhere else along the border, 10 times that amount is being sent through. Yeah. 1785. The Bavarian government outlawed the Illuminati and the order went underground. Having captured proof of an Illuminati conspiracy, the Bavarians began investigating all possible leads on members, not realizing that they had been deceived. The leads that they had resulted in little, and the publicizing of the order's activities actually aided it in becoming more invisible. On May 12th, the Royal Society in London was notified that miners blasting rocks at the Strait of Gibraltar to raise military batteries about 50 feet above sea level accidentally happened upon a human body fossil that measured 8.5 feet in length. To their amazement, the human was petrified in the rock with perfect features of flesh. Even his veins were perfectly preserved. Trapped in the same marble was a seashell. This was on display in London for decades, but as uniformitarianism took over, the display was removed, and since then it's been lost. In this year, 1785, President George Washington referred to America as the second land of promise. 1786. The Bavarian government publishes the details of the plot of the Illuminati to initiate the French Revolution, as well as intentionally its designs to control the world through banking cartels. All ideas originally fomented by Mayor Amschel Rothschild, a Jewish banker. Copies of the report are sent to the heads of state throughout Europe and the USA, but the order was already too entrenched and financed through the banks. The warnings about the Illuminati and their plans were thus downplayed. Agents of the Illuminati already in strategic positions around the world. The seriousness of the conspiracy was hardly regarded. The first major plan of the Illuminati was to cause the French Revolution, which indeed occurred as scheduled in 1789. 1787, the United States holds the First Continental Convention in Philadelphia, setting up a federal government. This year marked the last official burning of a heretic by the Inquisition. The Elector of Bavaria has the castle of Sandersdorf searched, and important Illuminati documents are found. In Siberia was discovered the perfect frozen remains of a woolly mammoth, which caused a stir in the scientific community. Remember, these are vapor canopy creatures that were frozen in place when the vapor canopy collapsed. They were quick frozen because they were too far away from the equatorial zone. England used gigantic hulks for their convicted felons. floating prisons that were overcrowded, unsanitary, filled with men, women, and children, many dying every month. England's penal laws were harsh. The majority of its prisoners were in debt, poverty class convicted of minor property crimes. England sent off its first Botany Bay fleet of 11 ships, 9 transports led by the HMS Sirius and and a supply sloop. This was 800 convicted felons from England. A third of them were women, and 4 companies of Marines to control them. 443 sailors with many wives and children of the Marines. The fleet set out for Australia using Captain Cook's maps. 1788. The first Federal Congress of the United States was held in New York. The Continental Convention completing its work in the amazing and world-famous United States Constitution. In finalizing the U.S. Constitution, James Madison considered it a miracle. He said, "It is impossible for the man of pious reflection not to perceive in the conventions a finger of that almighty hand." On April 30th, 1788, George Washington became the first president of the United States of America. Because of political jealousy, the former privateer John Paul Jones left North America and is appointed Rear Admiral of the Russian Navy by the Empress Catherine II. Catherine the Great. This is the story. This is the story all over the world through all time periods of many kings and rulers who had a very valuable asset in a warrior or an admiral or a ship captain who was just heroic. Heroic. And then the very people for which the hero secured freedom, they now turned on him for whatever reasons. And this is the hero story. It happens all the time. On January 18th, 1788, Captain Cook's anchorage at Australia. It was just over 8 months at sea. Only 23 convicts of the 800 died, which was not a bad record for those days. It was a very long voyage from England to Australia. Captain Phillip did not like the land beyond the bay, and the surveyors returned a report about Port Jackson that was more favorable. You know of this place as Sydney, Australia today. Relocating, they encountered 2 strange ships in this remote ocean that turned out to be the French explorer La Perouse with the ships La Bassole and El Astrolabe, investigating whaling prospects in the Pacific. On a few occasions, the French recorded bad experiences with the native Pacific Islanders. The French navigator and his 2 vessels after this vanished after leaving Botany Bay. I'm pretty sure that there was all kinds of accusations and weird conversations going on around Europe about this, but both ships of the French disappeared. In 1823, a chance discovery, this is 35 years later, a chance discovery found that both of La Perouse's ships had wrecked on the reefs of Vanikoro in the New Hebrides. All those men were dead. 1789. On the western side of the Atlantic Ocean, the United States Constitution became effective 13 years after the Declaration of Independence. There's that number 13 again. On the eastern side of the Atlantic, excuse me. Yeah, on the eastern side of the Atlantic, the French Revolution begins with the storming of the Bastille in Paris, a monumental prison. The revolution lasting until 1799. Behind the scenes, the major pushers and financiers of the revolution in France were Jewish. In this year, the Vatican condemned the United States Constitution as a satanic document. It's a document that secures rights, privileges, and immunities for all people. The Vatican says it was satanic. Benjamin Franklin in this year wrote, "There is a great danger for the United States of America. That great danger is the Jew." Gentlemen, in whichever land the Jews have settled, they have depressed the moral level and lowered the degree of commercial honesty. They have created a state within a state, and when they are opposed, they attempted to strangle the nation financially, as in the case of Portugal and Spain. Benjamin Franklin then uttered a stunning prophecy that has literally come true. Benjamin Franklin predicted, if the Jews are not excluded from the United States by the Constitution, within less than 100 years, they will stream into the country in such numbers that they will rule and destroy us and change our form of government. They will imperil its institutions. Benjamin Franklin was a prophet. He was an Israelite prophet. What he said has already come to pass. He said this before the Federal Reserve. He said this before the New Deal. He said this before President William McKinley was assassinated in 1901. He said this before the Roosevelts were put into power. 1790 AD. The Aztec stone of the fifth sun was discovered beneath tons of earth in a canal at the archaic ruins of the city of Tenochtitlan near Mexico City. This was an ancient American version of the last days apocalypse involving comets, quakes, and flooding. May of this year is 3,000 months to the worldwide disaster in 2040 by the Phoenix. Very interesting. The United States holds its first census in 1790, discovering that over 90% of the people were Anglo-Saxon, Celtic, and of related Teutonic descent German. The first federal naturalization laws required that citizens of the USA be free white persons. That was in the constitutional law. July, in France, before hundreds of witnesses in the municipality of La Grange de Ulac, several black stones fell from the sky with a hissing noise. On July 24th, meteorites rained on southwestern France, though scientists elsewhere disbelieved it. Remember, at this time, scientists, it wasn't until 1803 that scientists even officially recognized that stones could fall from the sky. 1803. In this year of 1790, an 8-foot 2-inch tall human skeleton with a spear is found in Donaday, Ireland. The second English penal colony fleet arrived in bad condition to Australia. 273 people died of the original 1,038, with 486 sick with malnutrition, the captains having profiteered by reducing the rations. 1791. French soldiers removed the remains of the prophet Nostradamus to the church in St. Laurent. From his birth in 1503 to the exhumation of his remains was exactly 288 years, 144 plus 144. In Russia, Catherine the Great forced all the Jews to resettle to the west of the country in what is known as the Pale of Settlement. This was 126 years before the complete takeover of Russia by the international Jews known as the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. In July, the Sea Fleet of England's Australian penal colony arrived at Port Jackson, 10 ships bringing 1,865 male convicts and 144 prostitutes. The Australian penal colony now numbered more than 4,000 people. The Third Fleet departed to begin hunting the Pacific whale. 1792. 1792 Anno Domini is 1,000 plus 972, the number of the Nemesis X object. This is 2376 years from the fall of Judah in 585 BC. This is 792 plus 792 plus 792 years after the Jewish state was obliterated by Babylon. In this year, the French founded the Republic of France, the Jews being the financiers of the French Revolution. This was exactly 1296 years, or 432 times 3, which is divisible by 144. It's 144 times 3, 432 years, times 3 to 1296 years, since the year 496 AD, when Clovis I converted to Christianity and the Franks were declared a Christian people. This was the end of the Moravian dynasty of the ancient Israelite French people. Now the French become an atheist people, and their hidden rulers, the Jewish elitists, control the government through their nationalist puppets. In this year of 1792, English navigator Bligh visited Tahiti earlier in late 1788. And now, in returning, he documented the corruption of Polynesian culture on Tahiti, the ruin brought upon the islanders by the whalers, the missionaries, and European institutions. In this year, the cornerstone to the White House in Washington is laid, and the U.S. Mint is established. This year is connected to the Anuna 792 Nemesis X. 1794. Mount Vesuvius in Italy erupted. Stones rained from the sky over Tuscany. Historians have connected the two events despite the known fact that Vesuvius eruption was not powerful enough to launch stone debris into the atmosphere to rain down on Tuscany. As seen in Chronicon, the falling of stones from the sky, even on a clear day, has been recorded many times. And many times, stones fall from the sky all over the world when highly localized volcanic activity happens in different areas. The two are not connected by the fact that the stones are coming from the volcanoes. Something else is happening. 1794. Ernst Kaldney and Heinrich Olbers of Germany defend the controversial notion that meteorites were of extraterrestrial origin, offering a scientific explanation. But scientists of the day disbelieved that stones could come from the sky. In the same year, Erasmus Darwin released his book, Zoonomia, or the laws of organic life, proposing a general concept of biological evolution, 65 years before Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859. You don't hear much about Erasmus Darwin, and I find it highly unusual that both men were named Darwin. 1795 AD. The word Caucasian is termed by Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, who used it to describe the white people of Europe. 1795. The London Missionary Society founded to evangelize the world. They immediately turned their attention to the Pacific, specifically Tahiti. 1796. Pierre Laplace, 250 years before Nemesis X returns in 2046, wrote, "What would occur if a large enough comet struck the world?" For 1796, this was really interesting. He wrote that the rotational movement will be changed. The seas forsaking their age-old positions and rushing towards the new equator. Most of the human race and the beasts of the field will be drowned in a universal deluge and destroyed in the violent shock imparted to the terrestrial globe. Entire species will be annihilated, every monument to human endeavor overthrown. Laplace, 250 years before 2046, wrote that the rotational movement will be changed. What have I shown you already that's going to happen in 2046? Book of Revelation says 1/3 of the sun, 1/3 of the moon, 1/3 of the stars, 1/3 of the day, 1/3 of the night will be reduced by a third. This means the 24-hour day will become 16 hours. This means that the 365.25 day year will become 243 days. How will this happen? Because the world will be moved. Now, of course, this is going to be simulated. The only thing that truly moves is the sky, but it doesn't matter from the matter of perception. We will think that our world has changed positions, but it's only the sky that's mimicking this. So in this year of 1796, London Missionary Society, oh, I already got that. I already got all that. Oh, no, no, I didn't. The London Missionary Society chose Tahiti as its Pacific base of operations in Christianizing the Pacific. Okay, the year after this, year after this, 1798 is 4900 Vedic calendar. Napoleon Bonaparte, a Corsican, he led 70,000 French troops into Egypt and defeated the Turks at the Battle of the Pyramids, which was not really fought in the vicinity of the pyramids at all. Napoleon's train included many scientists, a mathematician with the French surveyors studying the ruins in Egypt, measuring the Great Pyramid's dimensions, and concluding that there was enough stonework to build a wall 9 feet high around the entire country of France, using the stone of the Great Pyramid. Napoleon said, I feel myself drawn towards an end that I do not know. As soon as I shall have reached it, as soon as shall have become unnecessary, an atom will suffice to shatter me. Till then, not all the forces of mankind can do anything against me. That's awesome. As the Jews were avid supporters of the French Revolution, Napoleon went on record as saying that he did not trust them. In fact, Napoleon remarked that the Jews are the master robbers of the modern age. He said, we ought to ban the Jews from commerce because they simply abuse it. Napoleon's General Berthier captured the Pope of Rome and sent him in chains. Remember who the Pope serves? The tiny hats. He captured the Pope of Rome and sent him in chains to France, where he later died. Many hold that this act was prophesied in the scriptures, for this year was 1260 years, exactly after the year 538. 1260 is the number of prophecy in the book of Revelation and in the book of Daniel, specifically mentioning 1,260-year period. I believe it's divisible by 360. Not sure, no. But 1260 years is the number of prophecy. It is exactly half of the prophetic countdown of 2520, 360 times 7. Mean, tikal partian. Weighed, number divided. It is the number of judgment. Judgment enacted or judgment withheld. So 538 AD was when the Pope was declared supreme over all of Christendom by the Emperor Justinian. So many people believe that the beast, the Vatican, received its deadly wound in this year by Napoleon, the tiny horn, the little horn. He was a little man. 1260 years after the Pope was declared supreme, the Pope is sent in chains and dies in France. Also in this year, John Robison, a professor and high degree Mason of the Scottish Rite, published his book titled Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All the Religions and Governments of Europe, carried on in the secret meetings of the Freemasons, the Illuminati, and the Reading Societies. He was a professor of the prestigious Edinburgh University who in 1783 had been elected General Secretary to the Royal Society. He disclosed data given to him personally by Adam Weishaupt. All psyop. He arrived at 1799 AD. Napoleon Bonaparte becomes the first consul of France. In Egypt, the French scientists excavated many ancient Egyptian sites. The French scholar Francois Jomard measured the Great Pyramid at a height of 144 meters, or 481 feet high. On August 12th, Napoleon stayed alone in the king's chamber and later emerged looking pale and haggard. He did not explain what he experienced, though his associates claimed that something indeed transpired inside the structure. Napoleon asserted on his deathbed that no one would ever believe him if he told the truth about his experience, so he did not convey it. He kept it to himself. Napoleon's archaeologists discovered the famous Rosetta Stone, a trilingual inscription monument written in Egyptian hieroglyphics, Demotic script, and Greek that would later prove to be the key to deciphering the elusive hieroglyphs. The Rosetta Stone was made in 195 BC by Ptolemy V, surnamed Epiphanes. Alessandro Volta invented the modern battery, 1799. Interestingly, that's the modern battery because the Baghdad batteries are far more ancient. In this year of 1799, George Washington died on Mount Vernon, and the entire nation of the United States mourned the passing of this living legend. The year is 1800 AD. The federal government of the United States moved to Washington, D.C. The Library of Congress is founded. As North America is the last days land of promise, the new Israel filled with the blood descendants of the migrating Israelites. This year of 1800 is precisely 20 years after the last of the 10 tribes of Israel were deported by the Assyrians in 721 BC, the Phoenix year. This North American start for the center of authority was 1,000 years exactly after the European center of authority over the Israelite descendants began in the year 800 with Charlemagne the Great and the Holy Roman Empire. 1801 AD. The ports of the Mediterranean and Europe were now seeing many merchant vessels from the United States, flying U.S. flags. For decades, the piracy had increased in the Mediterranean, from those known as the Barbary Coast Pirates, who ruled from Tripoli. The United States embarks on the Tripolitan War against Libya to end the piracy of American ships. This is the United States' first official war outside the Independence War with England. French engineer and archaeologist Edmé Francois-Jamard and astronomer René Noé counted 203 as the number of courses of masonry to the Great Pyramid. This is correct, for the 204th piece of the monument is missing, known as the chief cornerstone. The first scientific explorations of Greater Australia are conducted. It is now understood that Australia was actually a continent and not an island. Coastal exploration by the ship Investigator with scientific staff selected by Banks, who had sailed with Cook. They're looking for opportunities to make money. In this year of 1801, Napoleon Bonaparte said, "I decided to improve the Jews, but I do not want any more of them in my kingdom. Indeed, I have done all to prove my scorn of the vilest nation in the world." Yeah, Napoleon said that. The year is 1802. George Grotfin translated the trilingual Behistun rock inscriptions, accurately translating ancient cuneiform for the very first time. This is exactly 37 years or 74 jubilees after the Babel cataclysm that resulted with a need to develop cuneiform, an inability for people to communicate. I can hear one of my dogs even in the studio. Get my water at. 1803. Napoleon of France sold the French territories of North America west of the United States to the newborn nation, known as the Louisiana Purchase. The increase in territory doubled the geographical boundaries of the United States. This move fulfilled an eschatological type found in the biblical records. The firstborn of Jacob was Reuben, who was unstable as water, though strong. The birthright nation should have been France, from the Franks, the people of Charlemagne, out of the Moravian dynasty of ancient Israel, the first people to establish a European empire after the fall of Rome. But Reuben lost the birthright. He was unstable as water. In the book of Jasher and the book of Genesis, we learned that the birthright passed to the last born. In fact, the sons of Joseph, son of Jacob, who were born not in Israel but in Egypt. Manasseh and Ephraim were adopted by Jacob, and Ephraim prophesied to be greater than Manasseh. Indeed, Ephraim, the United States, was doubly fruitful, for that's what it means. Soon, all the nations of Europe would have whole communities migrating to the United States to fill up these lands, almost as big again as all of Europe. A land rich in resources, the acquisition of the Louisiana Purchase was nothing short of the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy. Ephraim became doubly bountiful. This is the first year the scientific establishment accepts that stones could actually fall from the sky. 1803. Trust the science. The ship Investigator took 2 years to circumnavigate and explore and map Australia's coasts and hinterlands, returning to Port Sydney in the month of June. 1804. Napoleon Bonaparte made himself emperor of all Europe, subduing most of Italy and Spain, defeating Austria and Prussia, and domineering over all of Europe west of Russia. Having finally agreed stone fell from the sky, now tremendous numbers of little toads, 1 to 2 months old, fell from a thick cloud that suddenly appeared on a cloudless blue sky day in the month of August near Toulouse, France. 1805. The British Army defeated Napoleon's forces in the Battle of Trafalgar, halting French expansionism. The Pasha of Tripoli released the American prisoners, the United States winning the Tripolitan War, but the conflict would not truly end until 1815. 1806. Napoleon refused to acknowledge a German Holy Roman Empire. He divided Germany into states under the Confederation of the Rhine, under French jurisdiction. 1808. The United States outlaws the importation of African slaves. This virtually ended the African slave trade. On May 16th, a procession of meteorites passed overhead. For 2 hours it was observed, some falling to the ground, where it was discovered that these falling stars were composed of some alien gelatinous substance. This was 2520 years after the 713 BC change of the year from 360 days to 365.24 days by the dark satellite in 713 BC. 2520 years is 7 years 360 times over. The year is 1811. The charter for the Bank of the United States ran out, a charter that was owned by the Rothschilds. Nathan Rothschild threatens the United States that it will be embroiled in a terrible war, even be subject back under colonial status, if the charter was not renewed. Even by this date, the House of Rothschild, begun from Jew Mayer Amschel, already exercised international power throughout Europe. The New Madrid earthquakes rocked the United States in a series of the most widespread and powerful earthquakes on record. The epicenter was located at New Madrid on the Mississippi River in Missouri. Quake shocks were felt as far as New York and Florida, with church bells ringing by themselves in Virginia. The quakes occurred in late 1811 after the appearance of the Great Comet. At one point, the Mississippi River was observed to flow backwards, and in Kentucky, the renowned naturalist John James Audubon and others heard a roaring in the sky, thinking it was a tornado. They observed a darkening of the sky, and then it brightened, the darkness strange and unusual. Interestingly, the ancient Egyptian number for cataclysm was 2448, as seen in Chronicon, which was the year of the Exodus and the disasters and plagues in the Annus Mundi calendar, being 1447 BC. But counting from the first English settlement of permanence in North America, Jamestown, in 1607, passed exactly 2448 months to the 1811 New Madrid quakes. 2448 was the number of exodus and disaster. Then comes the year 1812. The War of 1812 begins between British Canada and the United States from June 18th to December 24th, 1814. The people of the United States called it the Second War for American Independence. It was a banker's war. The British burned the city of Washington, D.C. and the White House. 5 weeks after the New Madrid quakes in 1811, in January 1812, another earthquake shook the eastern United States, followed by a second quake, then a third, and a far more destructive quake on February 7th that was felt over 1.5 million square miles. The British war machine was from money borrowed from the Rothschilds, but their war against Napoleon greatly diminished their American war effort. Napoleon sought to invade Russia and marched 422,000 soldiers east in the greatest disaster of his illustrious career. Freezing temperatures and a typhus epidemic ensured that only 10,000 men returned from the failed invasion. Another comet appeared in this year. Also in 1812, in limestone supposedly dated at 28 million years by scientists, men on the French Caribbean coast of Guadeloupe excavated a perfectly preserved human female fossil. She stood 5 foot 2 inches tall, and her entombed body was sent to the British Museum in a 2-ton block that was displayed in England as evidence of Noah's flood. In this year, catastrophism is introduced as an explanation for the mass extinctions of the past by Georges Cuvier of France. Also in this year of 1812, a 10-foot 3-inch tall human skeleton is unearthed at the Valley of Mazzara in Sicily. And we arrive at 1814. During the British bombardment of Fort McHenry, Francis Scott Key wrote the famous Star-Spangled Banner. The conclusion of this war demonstrated that the Americans were rapidly becoming the equals of any European power. This was exactly 120 years after the Bank of England started in 1694, 120 being a major foundational number in calendrics. The Bank of England was owned by the Rothschild banking dynasty, and the War of 1812 was a demonstration to the American government how easy it was that they could influence entire nations to war. Interestingly, this year was 148 years, or 1776 months, after the Great Fire of London in 1666. Also in 1814, Pope Pius VII restored the Order of the Jesuits officially, though many believe the Jesuits only went underground and were never truly abolished priorly. This was 1260 years after the imperial restoration of the Holy Roman Empire by Justinian in the year 554 AD. Also in 1814, President Thomas Jefferson wrote to Dr. Walter Jones regarding the death of George Washington. He said, "I felt on his death with my countrymen that verily a great man hath fallen this day in Israel." 1816 AD. In Mammoth Cave, Kentucky, were discovered labyrinthine tunnels wherein were found mummified human female with finely chiseled features showing her to be young. She was fossilized. Due to continued pirate attacks on U.S. ships in the Mediterranean, Congress declared war on Algiers and the Barbary States. A U.S. naval fleet was sent to Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, and peace was obtained for U.S. merchants, anyone flying the Stars and Stripes. Napoleon's forces were opposed by the British, the Prussians, and Belgians in the famous Battle of Waterloo. Amschel Rothschild is praised in international Jewry today for his brilliant defrauding of the English people. Knowing that the stock market would crash if Napoleon won and that it would soar if the British won, Rothschild had agents on the continent and in the English Channel spread using carrier pigeons and signal ships bad information. Though Rothschild received the message that the French lost and Napoleon was defeated, he deliberately set out agents throughout London to spread the news that Napoleon was victorious and that England had lost the Battle of Waterloo. The result was predicted. The stock market plummeted, and Mayor Amschel Rothschild, through his Jewish agents, bought up whole companies for pennies on the dollar in an unparalleled buying frenzy that left the English people bankrupt, whole families with century-old companies completely destitute. The next day, the truth was known that Napoleon was defeated and captured by the British, but it was too late for England. Rothschild stole the wealth of England in a single day based off of a lie. London has been called the city ever since, 100% under Jewish control. Napoleon is exiled to the island of Elba, where he escaped the same year and began his second conquest of France. Napoleon has been much demonized in the history books, by the universities, by Hollywood, but the historical record shows that the little man was very much an enemy of the tiny hats. I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation, and I promise you it's not going to be near that long before the next one. Post-colonial war strategy of the tiny hats starting in 1819. And probably a tiny hats video where I have some really good audio. Haven't had that before. So the year 1819 is 287 years before Armageddon, the return of the chief cornerstone, 2106 AD. This is exactly 4,057 years after the Great Typhon Flood, 2239 BC. 1819 is right after the War of 1812. It is our second war against the crown. So 1819 is the 43rd year of the United States. It's the USA Ephraim calendar. So in this year, about 2,000 square miles of dry land in India sank below the sea abruptly. Can you imagine seeing that? The ancient 200-ton monolith known as Cleopatra's Needle, an obelisk from the Egyptian city of Memphis, crafted in the year 1515 BC, was given to the British by Muhammad Ali. It would be another 59 years before being relocated to London, which would later be known as the city. London would become Jewish occupied under the Rothschilds. No, it's a district. It's not even a part of the United Kingdom anymore. London is like Washington D.C. It belongs to the tiny hats. When when Tutmosis III had this and another obelisk erected in 1515 BC, both Manasseh and Ephraim were still alive in Egypt, and Egypt was full of laboring Israelites. This is in the Old Testament narrative, especially in the book of Jasher. The pedigree of the peoples of the British Isles and the United States, and by extension most of Europe, would soon be demonstrated as the very obelisks their ancestors erected in Egypt over 33 centuries earlier would be placed in the major power centers belonging to the last days descendants of the Israelites, London and New York. In this year, Arthur Schopenhauer wrote in his The World and Representation, he wrote, thus animals existed before men, fish before land animals, plants before fish, and the inorganic before the organic. Consequently, the original mass had to go through a long series of changes before the first eye could be opened. The myth that Charles Darwin was the first to believe in biological evolution is clearly dissolved here. What most people don't realize is that the uniformitarian model was a philosophy, not a science. In this year of 1819, an enormous mass passed over the sun as seen from Augsburg, Germany, a well-defined round spot about the size of Mercury. After this, there would be many more sightings of this object, and astronomers in the 1800s would come to call it Vulcan. 1820. This is the 1344th year since the fall of Rome in 476 AD. 1344 is really interesting because it is in the 1344th year of the Anno Nur calendar, which began in 5239 BC. We have the fall of Adam, of the Adamu, 3895 BC, the Typhon reset, the Genesis reset that started year one of the pre-flood world. Year one of the pre-flood world was the 1344th year of Anno Nur calendar. Cross-calendrical parallels are everywhere, especially when the closer you get to the last days, the more and more the calendrical systems take on the structuring of the beginning. This is the 44th year of the United States. This is exactly 220 years before the return of the Phoenix in May 2040. Total systemic reset. So in 1820, a large object is seen traversing the sky across the disk of the sun on April 27th by astronomer Steinheibel of Vienne. Caviglia found Roman letters blackened upon the roof of the subterranean chamber below the Great Pyramid in Egypt. It is discovered that Antarctica, this is 1820, it is discovered that Antarctica, formerly believed to be the only ice sheet, only an ice sheet like the North Pole, its counterpart, the Arctic, is actually the seventh continent and that it is buried under ice. This is really, really compelling that in 1820, modern science made this discovery. And yet maps from the 1500s clearly show Antarctica was land with mountains, valleys, forests, and all that. And there was no ice. Piri Reis map, Zeno map are just two of them. Geologists and researchers have since found evidence of tropical flora and fauna beneath the ice sheets, confirming the evidence from old maps that there was a large landmass at the southern region of the planet prior to the ice buildup. You guys know I don't believe in the planet model anymore, but a lot of this stuff, a lot of these manuscripts I have were written, a long time ago, and they've been a whole lot of new materials been added without really changing the structure of the original documents. I believe we live in a construct. The word planet doesn't apply anymore. Historians like Charles Hapgood have provided a wealth of information showing that the ancients were aware of the continent at the South Pole. In this year of 1820, Emperor Alexander I of Russia expelled the Jesuits from all of Russia. Now, you're gonna we're gonna get into Russian pogroms because the Russians had had enough. They were tired of the tiny hats. They were tired of their bullshit, and it became over a period of time during the 1700s. It became very obvious that the Rothschilds had taken over the Vatican. They had taken it over. The popes began wearing a tiny hat. And now Jesuits and Rosicrucians and Freemasons and all the different orders of Freemasonry were all under the power of the tiny hats. This is how they infiltrated. The Russians were not trying to hear it. They expelled the Jesuits knowing they were no different than tiny hats. So Bellingshausen set out with a Russian expedition to the Antarctic from Kronstadt on the Baltic. The knowledge of the Antarctic had remained the same since Cook 50 years before. In the Russian vessels Vostok and Mirny, which crossed over the Antarctic Circle and were probably Arctic Circle and probably the first men to lay eyes on the Antarctic, that's the South continent. So the Russians were ahead of the game, just like they were in the alleged space race. The following year is 1821. 45th year of the United States. The Greeks revolt against the Turks, starting 6 years of desperate warfare. At first, the European powers watched with interest but did nothing to aid officially. However, many groups of young men from different nations gathered in Greece to help the Greeks against their occupying enemies. Richard Lawrence in this year translated the ancient Ethiopic Book of Enoch into English, fulfilling the book's self-proclaimed prophecy. This is interesting, that it would be discovered in the last days and translated into other languages. This is in the Book of Enoch. It literally gives a prophecy about itself being rediscovered in the last days and translated into the languages of the world, which is precisely what happened. In this year, French scholar Jean-Francois Champollion he deciphered the alien Egyptian hieroglyphics using the Rosetta Stone, trilingual inscription found by Napoleon's men in Egypt. Napoleon Bonaparte died in this year of 1821. Stephen Austin founded the first American colony in Texas, which was controlled at the time by Mexico. This is Stephen F. Austin. In the next year, 1822, 46th year of the United States, an earthquake near Java in Indonesia killed 4,000 people with volcanic eruptions lasting for 5 hours. In another area of the Pacific from Java and Indonesia, in Honolulu, Hawaii, the very first well dug there yielded up a human skull and other remains underneath 8 feet of ancient coral, volcanic sand, and loam. How in the hell did a human skull get under ancient coral, volcanic sand, and loam? Respected astronomer Baron von Paula Gruithausen, probably pronounced Gruithausen, I have no idea how to say that, observed with a powerful telescope what he believed to be the architectural ruins of a lunar cityscape near the center of the moon bordering Sinus Medii. Also in this year of 1822, the Council of Verona of the Vatican held that the United States of America was too powerful and had to be destroyed at all costs. Jesuits were assigned the task of dividing the United States. The concept of religious freedom was unacceptable to the papacy. This is also the year Comet Enki appeared, 1822. The following year is 1823. It is the 47th year of the United States. General Bolivar of South America led a revolution against Spain and the European monarchies who were determined to send military aid to suppress this insurrection. To aid Spain, a holy alliance of European powers designed to keep their foreign holdings in submission. The British opposed this European intrusion and the Americans joined the opposition. President Monroe declared formally that if any European power should attempt to extend their authority anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, the United States would regard this as an act of hostility. Known as the famous Monroe Doctrine, this American act is what led to the explosion of Central and South American republics in the following years. The whole of Europe did not want to take on a British-American alliance. The Monroe Doctrine, a protection over Americans from European intrusion was 216 years, or 108 plus 108 years after the first English permanent colony founded in North America in Jamestown in 1607. Now, this development bears a little commentary that the United States would engage in two wars against the British Crown, back to back, the Independence War and the War of 1812, and then ally with the Crown against all other European nations, even those nations that sided with the United States in the War of Independence, lends credence to the theory that England actually won the War of 1812, which has long been rumored in academic circles that the United States has truly been under maritime law and the crown since 1814 when the war was concluded. I can see no other way to interpret the series of events. Remember, we have to interpret things by their effects. And for us to so quickly ally with what had proven to be an enemy, and even ally with them against our former allies, yeah, pretty much meant that we were a captured operation. It was the American people that weren't told by those in upper American government that we had fallen back under the crown. They had disguised it. The following year, oh no, we're still in 1823. In 1823, the Russian Otto von Kosbu, after seeing the corruption of Polynesian culture, wrote, "A religion like this, which forbids every innocent pleasure and cramps or annihilates every mental power, is a libel on the divine founder of Christianity. It is true that the religion of the missionaries has, with a great deal of evil, effected some good. It has given birth to ignorance, hypocrisy, and a hatred of all other modes of faith." Yeah, the man is basically telling you what I have been saying on my YouTube channel for a couple of years. The core spiritual elements of Christianity in the red letter edition of Jesus' words are pure spiritual food. What followed was a church that became tyrannical. And what he's saying right here is when the Christians appeared in Polynesia, they totally ruined the culture. 1824. The next year is 1824. This is 108 years plus 108 years to 2040. Total systemic reset by Phoenix. This is 216 years until the return of Phoenix, which is basically going to destroy a quarter of the world. So we have astronomer Grothenhausen again. He claims in this year of 1824 to have sighted colossal buildings located just north of the Schroeder crater this time. So this guy is really studying the moon, and he keeps seeing geometry in his telescope that's telling him that there are artificial constructions on the moon, and they're associated to craters. We'll see later in future videos. I don't think it'll be in this video, but in the 20th century, the Russians did photograph craters that seemed to be opening like an iris, like an eye, like a whole. It was just really weird how they described it. So the year is 1826. This is precisely the 50th year. This is our Jubilee year for the United States. It's the 50th year. It is also the 1300th year of Anno Domini, since the Anno Domini calendar was designed. Remember, 13 is a number that is associated to the Americas, like the 13 Bactans, the Mayan concept of 13 heavens over the 13 hells, their calendar divided in 13 epics. And it was 13 clans of the Maya, no different than the 13 colonies of the original United States. So in 1826, two of the most prominent American fathers, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, both died on July 4th of this year. Both men having signed the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, exactly 50 years earlier in 1776. What are the chances that any of the founding fathers would have died on July 4th, the day they all signed the Declaration of Independence? What are the chances that it would have been exactly a Jubilee, which all of them adhered to the Hebrew Jubilee system, that 50 years was a holy period to the founding fathers? What are the chances that would have happened? And what are the chances mathematically that two of the most famous founding fathers would die on the same day, exactly 50 years later? It's crazy. This dual death occurred precisely 72 years, a processional cycle, after George Washington, the most prominent of the fathers of America, surrendered Fort Necessity to the overwhelming force of English and Indians in 1754 on the day of July 4th. So July 4th represents American independence, but it also represents surrendering to the crown. Think about that. The timing of these events and connections between these three Anglo-Saxon fathers of America demonstrate the signature of the divine in the beginning of the United States of America, a nation-turned-empire unlike any that this world has ever seen. Also in this year, a Mason named Captain William Morgan made it his duty to warn the American people about the Illuminati operations occurring in secret meetings at Mason lodges, a warning also made by President George Washington. Agents of the Illuminati cried Morgan in absentia, and he had to flee toward Canada. Near Niagara Falls, a Mason from England named Richard Howard caught up with him and killed him. The story thoroughly documented in police reports and trial records in New York. In this year also of 1824, Comet Beta was sighted. So this guy tells the public that the Illuminati are operating in Mason lodges, and the Masons hunt him down. They hold court in absentia outside the judiciary of the law, but they hold court in the lodges and basically pronounce the death sentence. They are a law unto themselves. 1827, the following year, the 51st year of the United States. So after 6 years of intense fighting against the Turks, the Greeks won their independence after the combined navies of Britain, Russia, and France defeated the Turkish navy in the Battle of Navarino. 1828 Anno Domini. 1828 encodes the Phoenix first Earth system numbers, because 828 is 414 times 2. 414 is 138 times 3. So 828 is 138 times 6. 1828 is the 5200th year of the Olmec calendar. Remember, the ancient American calendars were based off the number 52, which is based off the number 13. 13 times 4 is 52. So 1828 of our calendar is the 5200th year of the Olmec calendar. It is also 1872 years Roman Julian, which is 144 times 13. This is the year 52 of the United States of America. All the calendrics show that we've got the calendar right. We are exactly where we are supposed to be in the timeline by 1828. And it shows that the 1828 Anno Domini date is perfect because it lines up with these other calendars, all based off the number 13. The 52nd year of the United States Declaration of Independence was the 5200th year of the ancient American calendrical system preserved by the Olmecs. So, also, 1872 years after the start of the Roman Julian calendar, remember, the United States based its medical vernacular, political government vernacular, and its scientific vernacular off of Latin from Rome. So Julian calendar or 52 times 36. 1872 years of the Roman Julian calendar is 52 times 36. In this year, President Andrew Jackson was elected, and after an internal investigation of the 11,000 federal employees of the American government, President Jackson fired 2,000. Out of 11,000 federal employees, he fired 2,000 men and women who all had ties to the Jewish Rothschild banking dynasty of Europe. Many of these employees were closet Jews who had early on Americanized their names to conceal their identities. The move enraged the Rothschilds, and they vowed vengeance. The first passenger railroad train began operations in the United States, Baltimore and Ohio, starting on July 4th. Noah Webster published his world famous Webster's Dictionary. This long researched work was increasingly necessary because American English had already deviated quite a bit from European English, having absorbed so many French, Spanish, German, Dutch, African, and Indian words. The Museum of Leiden in the Netherlands, or is that Leiden in the Netherlands, acquired an ancient manuscript written by the sage Ipuwer that described perfectly the plagues of Egypt and total devastation of Egypt and the cities of the Nile. This would have been 1447 BC, the Exodus 10 plagues. At this time, its relevance to the biblical story of Exodus was unknown. It would be discussed by professionals in the year 1902. And then the findings relating it to the Exodus would be released in 1909. At Sparta, Tennessee, was found a small 19-inch tall adult human skeleton. I tell you all the time, our world is not what you think. I love looking at the calendrics because it shows you that the time, all that 1,000 years missing from the calendar. No, we're missing history. We're not missing calendars. Calendrics don't lie. 1829. This is the 53rd year of the United States. The Russian army invaded Turkey. Under the Treaty of Adrianople, Greece was declared a free state from the Turks. But now she was subjected to European dominance. A German king was appointed to rule Greece. The first recorded racial riot occurred in the United States. White Americans, angered over the increasing criminality among the blacks in Cincinnati, led many whites against the local blacks. British millionaires James Smithson died, leaving money behind for the establishment of an institute in the United States that would increase knowledge among men. This is the origin of the Smithsonian Institute, which originally set out to fulfill this mission, but over the passage of time, special interest groups, corporate pressures, the needs of the industry, and government intrusion altered the Smithsonian Institute into one of the most damaging knowledge filters in the world. Now I believe it's called the Smithsonian Institution. For many years, the oddest archaeological artifacts, fossils of petrified humans, and even gigantic human bones and relics, parts, out-of-place artifacts, were all sent to the Smithsonian for further validation and study, but none of these shipments were ever heard from again. Also in this year, a substance fell from the sky in Persia, that's Iran, the sheep consuming it. Some people even baked bread out of it. Now Charles Fort has a lot about this carbonaceous, flaky-like material that falls from the sky that's edible. Kind of reminds you of the Old Testament story about the Israelites in the desert being fed manna for 40 years. So we get to the year 1830. 1830 is a 1, 3, and an 8 in it. Phoenix number. Why is this interesting? Because 1830 is exactly 276 years before the end of the Anno Mundi calendar, 2106 AD, the year 6000 since the Adam and Eve reset. 276 years to Armageddon. So this is 276, 138 plus 138. But it's also 2,760 years since the divided kingdom calendar began. That's 276 times 10, or 138 times 20. 138 times 20. It's 2760 years since the year 931 BC, when the 10 tribes of Israel divided themselves from the southern tribe of Judah and Benjamin tribes. This is the 54th year of the United States of America. Charles Lyell publishes his famous Principles of Geology, postulating that geological formations are created over millions of years. Scientists hold the work as a scientific work of the decade, but the Christian world dismisses it as absurd. Remember, at that time, even most scientists were still catastrophists, not uniformitarians. Tasmania put under martial law. The indigenous Tasmanians were hunted and killed by the Europeans. Many French and Englishmen protested, but the onslaught was ungovernable. Those not killed were deported to the Bass Strait. Charles Darwin visited and later denounced this treatment. Though Tasmania lies in close proximity to Australia, the Tasmanians are admittedly a separate race from the Aborigines. Originally a population of about 5,000, Tasmanians possessed no boats, no boomerang, no bow and arrow. Despite a cold climate, they remained naked save for belted capes of kangaroo skin. Unlike the straight hair of the Aborigine, like the Dravidians from which they descended, the Tasmanians had woolly hair of the African sub-Saharan Africans, though some were documented to have reddish tint to their hair despite very black skin. Like the Aborigine, the Tasmanian was good-natured. The red perhaps derived from ancient Phoenician mariners or even Libyans. The following year is 1831, 55th year of the United States. The North Magnetic Pole first measured in this year. By 2006, 19 years ago, scientists discovered that not only is the magnetic field of the Earth weakening, but it has wandered 500 miles from 1831. Scientists as of 2007 now claim that the magnetic drift has accelerated to 25 miles a year. Though Nemesis X object nor the Phoenix are officially recognized by science, there are many astronomers and astrophysicists who assert that there must be another gravitational body somewhere within the solar system to account for the many solar system anomalies. There are many books about this topic. In 1831, the Nemesis X object had already passed aphelion, which is the furthest distance from the sun, and was already 151 years back toward the inner solar system, the entire journey of Nemesis X object being 366 years from its aphelion point, the farthest distance. As of 2012, Nemesis X object is only 34 years away from passing very close to Earth, which is why the increase in magnetic drift and its sudden spike is being noticed. Phoenix 2 approaches the inner solar system, and as of 2012, the intruder world is only 28 years away. So I'm asked all the time, Jason, how come you pass back and forth between simulation theory and the solar system model? Well, I'm going to tell you now, the Greeks even believed in the solar system model. I have quoted many ancient Greeks that talk about our world being spherical, being a globe, it being tilted at 23.5 degrees obliquity. This was something the ancient Greeks discovered. Why? Because all curvature is programmed into the sky. The sky lies. It's like a giant movie screen trying to convince us of something. But the sky, the more we study it, we see these perturbations. We see things that do not make sense. And we make discoveries like the Tychus-Bode law, the mathematical distribution of wandering stars that we call planets. So it is designed to make us draw conclusions that there's a solar system out there when there's not. It's a beautiful hologram. But it is a simulacrum. It very well could be a copy of somewhere else on the outside of the construct that is real. So we make these discoveries all the time. And one thing that's interesting is you can't see Neptune and you can't see Uranus with the naked eye. And yet they're in our inner solar system. With a telescope, you can see them, but you can't see them with the naked eye. So if a large body in the stellosphere was going to appear uh, close to us, you wouldn't see it until within a year of its arriving here. You just wouldn't see it. So, all right, let's see. Let's get to the next year. 1832. 1832 is the 56th year of the United States. It is 208 years before 2040. So that's 52. That's 52 times 4. The number of America times 4 until 2040. So as a result of the Black Hawk War that was fought in this year, the Sauk and the Fox Indians crossed the Mississippi River in their fight against U.S. expansion. In this year, Comet Bela was seen. 1833, the 57th year of the United States. This is 207 years, a Phoenix number. It is half of 414, the cursed Earth period, which is 138 times 3. 207 is also in months. I can't remember what it is in months. We're going to find out in a minute. I'm pretty sure I wrote it down. Maybe not. But 207 in months, 207 years, oh, is 2484 months, which is divisible by 138. This is 1833, 207 years before the Phoenix deal. It's a very intriguing year because of what happened in this year. A spectacular meteor shower is viewed over the United States and North America November 12th through 13th. For 6 hours, fiery meteorites gushed from the heavens, visible along the whole Atlantic coast of the United States and central United States. The conventional scientific explanation is that it was the Leonids, but the Leonids were never so spectacular, and the Leonids have shown had not to occur every year. It's just like Halley's Comet. They have a really nice theory that Halley's Comet's every 75.6 years or every 76.5 years, but it hasn't appeared every time. And when it has appeared, sometimes it's been 1 or 2 or 3 years off. So it's there's been many Novembers have passed and there was no Leonids. So the conventional explanation just doesn't stand. But I've shown pictures on YouTube and on Twitter. Spectacular. It is the most spectacular meteoric fallout that the world has ever seen in recorded history. The ink blots the woodcuts and pictures that we have seen from 1833 are spectacular. In this year of 1833, the island of Tuanaki vanished in the Pacific with all of its inhabitants. Search vessels found no trace of the island or any survivors. It was like an aboriginal Atlantis. At Lompoc Ranch, California, soldiers excavated among the carved shells huge stone axes and blocks of porphyry with an unknown script, the skeleton of a man who stood 12 feet tall and had a double row of teeth. Interestingly, the Hulin section of the Barakot of the Babylonian Talmud, Jewish text, states that giants before the flood had numerous rows of teeth. More gigantic humans were found with double dentition inside a mound near Clearwater, Minnesota. That's pretty interesting. That's the Ohio Mississippi Valley mound builder civilization. The next year is 1834. 1834 is the 58th year of the United States. It is 3,240 years since the founding of Israel, 1407 BC, when the Israelites conquered Canaan and took it. 40 years after the Exodus. 3240 is 1080 times 3. 3240 is divisible by 108. In this year of 1834, the horrific Spanish Inquisition ends, this being 1,296 years, or 432 times 3, divisible by 108, after the emergence of the papacy as supreme over all Christendom in the year 538, Anno Domini. In October, a fire destroyed the two houses of Parliament, known as the Great Fire, in London, 168 years after the Great Fire that destroyed London in 1666. 168 years is 24 times 7. Now, a fire destroys Parliament. I don't know. I haven't done a deep dive. Maybe you guys can look into it. But I'm wondering if 1834 doesn't have some tiny hat activity in there, since it involves London. At this time, they were deeply entrenched in taking over London. So I don't know. 1835, the 59th year of the United States, President Andrew Jackson was targeted for assassination by the international banking cartel begun by the Jewish Rothschilds. Firing of 2,000 federal employees was the first trespass he committed against these incredibly powerful men. Jackson vetoed a request for charter renewal for the Second Bank of the United States, owned by the Rothschilds. Now, in 1835, an assassin attempted to shoot the president first with one pistol and then another, and both pistols misfired. Jackson was a true American hero, and sadly, there were two other American presidents who also made war against the international banking cartel, and both of these men are still famous, and both were assassinated. Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy. Even even his brother, Robert Kennedy, would die for his meddling in the affairs of the world banks. On February 20th at Concepcion, Chile, about 5,000 people died of an earthquake witnessed by by the later to be famous Charles Darwin, author of On the Origin of Species. This was during his voyage on the Beagle. In 1835, also, the Liberty Bell cracked again. It had been recast with more iron than copper after its first split. While tolling the death of U.S. Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Marshall, a pure constitutionalist of the integrity that had not been not it has not been revisited, to the Supreme Court since. He's the last true hardcore constitutionalist. The Seminole Indians of Florida under Osceola make war against the United States for American intrusion into their lands. By 1842, they would be relocated to Oklahoma. Halley's Comet in this year appears on schedule. The papal assassins, uh, um, it was two papal assassins working for the Rothschilds that attempted to kill President Jackson and failed. So, also more news about in this year from Charles Darwin of on his voyage of the Beagle. He visited Tahiti in the South Pacific. He detested the New Zealander Europeans that had driven back the cannibal Maori as the very refuse of society. In this year, the last Tasmanians were rounded up and deported to the Bass Strait. So Charles Darwin wrote a lot about the inhumanities that Europeans were exercising against the local indigenous peoples of the South Pacific. The reason he was able to see all that is because in looking at all the species of different animals by which he based his theory of natural selection, he had visited many of those islands in the South Pacific. 1836 is 270 years to the end of the calendar Anno Mundi. It's 2106 AD, return of the chief cornerstone. 270 years is 90 times 3. This is 5208 of the Olmec calendar. 5208 is a golden proportion number divisible by 108 and 144. This is the 60th year of the United States. 204 years. It's 204 years until the great cataclysm of the Phoenix in May of 2040. In the 60th year since the Declaration of Independence, President Andrew Jackson keeps his campaign promise to the American people. He refuses to renew the charter of the Bank of the United States. It would be 77 more years before the Rothschilds are able to conspire successfully against the American people with the Rothschild brainchild known as the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, which is neither federal nor a reserve. The Mexican army under General Santa Anna sieged the Alamo Mission Fort in San Antonio, Texas, killing all of the Texans defending it, including the famous Davy Crockett, a former pioneer and congressman of Tennessee. Later in the Battle of San Jacinto, Santa Anna is defeated by Sam Houston, and the independent Republic of Texas is begun, no longer under Mexico. The U.S. inventor Colt in this year makes the first Colt revolver. 6-shooter. The story behind the independent Republic of Texas is little known. The Mexican authorities had no problem with American settlers living in Texas, provided they released their slaves and ceased the practice of human trafficking. The American colonists grew in number and did not comply with this condition, prompting Santa Anna's military invasion to enforce the no slavery laws. The Americans fought back, and those that died in the Alamo did so defending their right to own slaves. The creation of the Republic of Texas was not over American freedoms or any political American ambitions for the acquisition of new territory, but for the continuance of the institution of slavery. The year 1836 is precisely 204 years, or 2448 months, the ancient Egyptian number for cataclysm, as I've shown many times, before the year 2040, the Phoenix cataclysm. Now, the sum of 2448 is representative of cataclysm, just as the 10 plagues on Egypt at the Exodus event occurred in 2448 Anno Mundi, which was our year 1447 BC. As Texas had its beginning in 1836, we find that it will end in 2040. For as revealed in my book, When the Sun Darkens, when the lithosphere slips, the far east from Indonesia to China will thrust northward. As North America on the other side of the Pacific will be shoved southward. The central United States will be flooded in a matter of hours as the Gulf of Mexico remains still while the North American continent is thrust underneath it. The sea level will rise like a tsunami and rush up the landmass, completely swallowing Galveston, Houston, Austin, Dallas, and Fort Worth, all the way to Tulsa, Oklahoma. When the lithosphere slips, the world's oceans initially stay in place and the crust of the world moves beneath them. North America will largely be under the Gulf of Mexico as South America is plunged into the Antarctic. The epicenter of the entire rotation will be northern Egypt, where the number 2448 is prominent. It is the site of the Great Pyramid. The destruction of the Americas is hinted at by the fact that 1836 is also 5208 of the ancient American Olmec calendar, this being 434 times 12. The sum 434 is found in Chronicon everywhere, and it refers to judged time. It means you've run out of time. 12 is the number of the calendar round. So this may have a lot to do with why Trump and others are trying to concentrate on Canada and Greenland right now. Because if they've done their homework, if they've been paying attention to what's going on in the world, if they've actually done scale models of the destruction the Phoenix is going to do in 2040 and the Nemesis X in 2046, they're going to realize that New Zealand, Australia, Indonesia are all going to be prime real estate, where Greenland and Canada and Alaska are going to be prime real estate, but not continental United States, not in the center part. Gulf of Mexico is going to sit right there in the middle of the present day United States. Charles Darwin aboard the Beagle sailed into Sydney Harbor amid ships from the English traders from India and China and the whalers. Australia's European population was now above 30,000 people when Charles Darwin got there. Darwin wrote that the Aborigines were humored and very pleasant, and they appeared far from being such utterly degraded beings as they have usually been represented. Charles Darwin was a humanitarian. 1837. It is the year. It is the 61st year of the United States. Wilkinson released his Manners and Customs of Ancient Egypt. He, being a renowned Egyptologist, this remained the textbook on ancient Egypt for decades. In 1837, British Colonel Richard William Howard Vyse received permission to excavate at the Great Pyramid and Sphinx from Muhammad Ali of Egypt. Vyse appointed a civil engineer named John Perring to carry on the excavations while he himself was frequently away. The Giza project excavated the tons of rubble left behind by the Turks and Egyptians who quarried away the white limestone casing blocks from the monument after the earthquake in 1356 AD. For centuries, scholars had doubted and debated the existence of this beautiful white garment described by Herodotus, Strabo, Diodorus, and others, but in 1837, the British expedition discovered some of these amazingly perfect 20-ton blocks at the lowest foundation of the structure, still in situ. Archaeologists and engineers have marveled over the precise symmetry of the smooth casing blocks with their 0.1% tolerance on its surfaces. Vyse would later go on to publish his operations carried on at the Pyramid of Giza 1837. Amazingly, this parallels the year 1837 BC, when, as found in Chronicon, the sage Abraham was in Egypt studying the inscriptions that were found on the surface casing blocks of the Great Pyramid, which is also the subject matter of my book, Lost Scriptures of Giza, published in 2006. The parallel is deepened by the fact that in 1837, the Englishman T.M. Lucas created a series of phonetic symbols embossed that could be understood by blind readers by touch. In this year, he translated the New Testament of the Bible into the symbolic language for the blind. Just as Abraham had translated the phonetic inscriptions on the pyramid, which became the core fundamental knowledge buried in the most ancient cosmological, religious, and historical texts in this world. The Vedas, the Sumerian and Babylonian tablet epics, the Egyptian fragments that became the Book of the Dead or the Book of Life, and so many others that also found their way into the Old Testament. Using gunpowder to unblock the southern shaft, Vyse's men, one specifically named R.J. Hill, discovered an iron plate in the shaft of the king's chamber. It was a foot long and 4 inches wide, and an inch thick. It had been embedded inside the masonry at the far end of the shaft. In 1989, scientists found that the strange plate had been smelted at a temperature of 1,000 degrees. Amazingly, these discoveries at the Great Pyramid, which stood at that in this date at 203 levels of masonry, was exactly 203 years before the worldwide disasters that will ruin the modern world in 2040, the return of the Phoenix. Get that. The Great Pyramid that was being excavated in 1837 by scientists in 1837, the Great Pyramid was being very seriously researched and discoveries were made. It's 203 years before 2040. The Great Pyramid is 203 levels of stone that they analyzed. Colonel Vyse is also responsible for devastating, a devastating forgery that has crippled Egyptology. Before 1837, before 1837, the ancient monument had remained bare of any Egyptian hieroglyphics. Not even a mummy was entombed within the structure. In fact, as readers of Chronicon know, the Giza complex is much older than Egyptian civilization, and the Egyptians themselves left records that they had found the pyramids buried in sand. That's 15th century BC. Then they spent 1,000 years trying to copy them, but to no avail. High in the structure, tucked into a relieving chamber, Colonel Weiss painted an incorrect cartouche for what he thought would be interpreted as the god pharaoh Khufu, knowing that it was a theory that Khufu built the structure, as they were told by Herodotus. Colonel Weiss was catapulted into instant fame by this discovery, but many scholars have since admitted that it was a forgery. In 1837, in 1837, Weiss misspelled Khufu's name. The first consonant is incorrect, having copied the error out of Sir John Gardner Wilkinson's Materia Hieroglyphica of the year 1806, which had the exact same cartouche error. Wilkinson published his three-volume Manners and Customs of the Ancient Egyptians, and Weiss had read it, there's no doubt. But we know that no hieroglyphics, nothing Egyptian has ever been found inside the Great Pyramid. It was a forgery. In fact, a master mason named Humphreys Brewer was an eyewitness to the forgery, who, having objected to it, was dismissed from service. He gave it up and they fired him. It's crazy. Also in 1837, the Japanese saw a ship approach their shores with a flag they had never seen. Red, white, and blue stars and stripes of America. The U.S. ship was returning Japanese sailors who were found adrift in the Pacific. Adhering to their isolationist stance, the Japanese opened fire with cannons, driving the Americans off. That was a dumb thing. That was a dumb thing to do. That was dumb. Drink some of this tea. See what's going on with this tea. Mm-mm. Some good stuff. So we get to the year 1838, 62nd year of the United States. In violation of the Supreme Court decision in Worcester versus Georgia from 1832, General Winfield Scott led the army in the rounding up of 12,000 Cherokee Tuskegee Indians, men, women, children in Georgia, and marched them across North America to Oklahoma. This event has gone down in American history as the Trail of Tears. About 3,000 Native Americans dying en route by starvation and disease. Some of the deaths were murders by American soldiers. After 10 years studying the moon, the German astronomers Johann Madler and Wilhelm Beer published their research in Der Mond, the moon, claiming that the moon had artificial constructions, and their book even provided maps showing the locations of these structures. In this year, Comet Enki appeared again. 1839, the 63rd year of the United States. A massive continental earthquake occurred from Turkey into Russia. The Opium War began between Great Britain and China. Chinese officials, sickened by the addictions of their people to opium that was used by the British to control the Chinese, these officials destroyed 2,000 chests of opium. The British retaliated swiftly, and the Chinese would again be subdued in the year 1842 when the British occupied Hong Kong. The astronomer Decuppus recorded that he witnessed a massive object moving through the inner solar system in this year. It was also seen by another astronomer named Leverrier, French guy. The year is now 1840. 1840 is the 64th year of the United States. It is precisely 200 years before the Phoenix reset of 2040. An earthquake created the almost 2-mile deep Ahora Gorge that is deeper than the Grand Canyon. It is a mile wide, and many report that it is more spectacular than the Grand Canyon. The gorge splits the northern part of Mount Ararat in Turkey in half. Sir Henry Rawlinson translated the Assyrian cuneiform text from analyzing the trilingual inscription found upon the Behistun rock in northeastern Persia, Iran. In November, a large French ship, the Rosalie, bound from Hamburg to Havana, Cuba, was found empty of its crew, derelict, floating upon the water silently. The crew had vanished. The valuable cargo was untouched. There was a half-starved canary, still alive in a cage. Powerful earthquake created a 2 mile. Oh, I already got that part. I'm sorry. So that's not the Rosalie is only one of many, 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 many ships that were found derelict. There are whole books published about derelict vessels where ships have been found, food still sitting out, everything normal activities, no evidence of piracy because nothing of value was touched. It looks like the only thing of value were the people, and something else took them. 1841, the 65th year of the United States, the Great Seal of the United States, designed by Barton with the Great Pyramid in the eye and the phoenix, had its die retired. This was 66 years or 792 months after the War for Independence began in 1775. The papal assassins poisoned to death President Harrison, who died after 35 days in office. It was believed in his day that he was poisoned by the Jesuits. This is a tiny hat operation. They killed another American president. In June, a gigantic flood wave raced down the Indus River. The Indus River tsunami, completely drowned the unprepared sick army camped near Adak. Several thousand soldiers and support personnel were lost. Buildings were destroyed. Trees were uprooted. 6 months priorly, a quake blocked the Indus River, creating a massive lake. The massive lake, it burst forth, and basically it was a tidal wave that drowned the army. 1842, the 66th year of the United States. 1776 independence. This is 792 months, the Nemesis X period. The British defeat the Chinese, and through the Treaty of Nanking, the opium trade is reinstated, even forcing China to legalize opium and pay restitution for the 2,000 chests they destroyed in 1839. On October 27th, a Roman Catholic demonstration in the United States had a priest amass a pile of Protestant Bibles in public before witnesses and burn them to ashes. Another Catholic demonstration against Protestant Bibles would be performed in 1902, exactly 60 years later, and all 30,000 participants would be incinerated by a volcanic eruption that very night when Mount Pelée exploded on the island of St. Martinique. They had just finished burning. 30,000 people had just finished participating in a ceremony burning Protestant Bibles. That was in 1902. So that sums up 1842. Now, 1843, the 67th year of the United States, an extremely bright comet was reported by astronomers. It had a tail that is estimated to be 500 million miles long. Now, according to the uniformitarian model, the sun is 93 million miles away, so that's a real long tail. Also in this year of 1843, farmers in a Moldavian village in ancient Dacia uncovered gigantic human remains, one being an upright giant. The military governor examined it and declared it was the remains of a Roman soldier of unusually gigantic stature. I doubt that, but that's okay. That's from a book, The Lost Race of the Giants. 1844 is the 68th year of the United States. Samuel Morse, inventor of the Morse code, demonstrated for the U.S. Congress the effectiveness of communicating via metal wires over long distances. As they listened, the very first words that came over the telegraph to astonish the assembly were from the biblical book of Numbers 23:23. What hath God wrought? The text reads, according to this time it shall be said of Jacob, Israel, what hath God wrought? Behold, the people shall rise up as a great lion. This is a prophecy of the reemergence of the Israelite nation in the form of the United States people, the collective blood of Europe. Interestingly, the first prophet of Israel was Samuel. A vase was excavated from an ancient Egyptian sarcophagus, and discovered inside of it was a pea. The pea was planted at the herbarium at Highgate, London, and was of great interest, for having been in the tomb for 2,944 years, the pea plant grew and produced a full crop of peas. 1845 is the 69th year of the United States. 1845, a comet appears late in the year and splits into two cometary fragments. The comet was named Bela. 1846, the 70th year of the United States. Early in the year, the fragments of Bela comet are seen by astronomer John Herschel. A new comet appears and is named Bronson. Astronomers insisting that this new comet does not orbit the sun but some other unknown body. German astronomer Gall discovered Neptune in the month of September. He searched in a region of space where astronomers predicted that another planet should be based on observed anomalies of Uranus. Neptune had 13 moons, and its orbital period is 164.8 Earth years around the Sun. The Smithsonian Institute opens up in this year in Washington, D.C. 78,000 United States troops invade Texas and Mexico. Texas at the time belonged to Mexico. Well, excuse me, Texas was an independent. Yeah, when Texas got its independence from Mexico, it didn't join the United States. It was independent. Sir Henry Rawlinson's significant discovery popularized that he discovered an ancient Persian reference to the Israelites on the Behistun rock, a name of the Israelites, Beth Sak, or House of Isaac, after they were deported by Assyria. This was the 70th year of the United States. By this year, North America boasted 735 whalers operating out of New England, each one averaging 100 whales. That's 300 tons of oil on every voyage. Not including the English whalers, the Pacific waters off Australia had 300 American and French vessels sealing and whaling. This is a During this period, a lot of oceanic mammals lost their lives. A lot of seals, a lot of walruses, a lot of whales. A potato fungus blight starved Ireland. Many of the Irish fled by ship to America, bringing Catholicism with them, a religion greatly resisted in Protestant America. In the next year of 1847, the 71st year of the United States defeats Mexico with 78,000 soldiers and cedes Texas, New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, and California, expanding the American landmass from the Atlantic to the Pacific. No other nation in this world has ever exponentially increased its own territories two and fourfold as did the United States through the Louisiana Purchase and then the Mexican War. This major victory in American expansionism was in the 240th year since the first English colonists founded Jamestown in the year 1607. Also, in 1847, the first iron building is constructed, an architectural engineering feat that would soon develop into skyscrapers. On December 8th, the sky blackened on a clear day over Arkansas, strange clouds materializing, and a reddish glow appeared over Forest Hill before a huge explosion was heard from the sky. A meteorite then crashed outside of town, creating a hole 8 feet deep. Within minutes, the sky had cleared. I've got videos on YouTube about that phenomenon. Highly localized, catastrophic phenomenon that happens to one area. They all experience it and see it, but nearby cities don't document anything unusual. 1848 is the 2600th year of Rome. It's 1,300 years plus 1,300 years is divisible by the American number of 52 calendar round. This is 2592 post-exilic chronology. That's 792 times 3. Let's see. Well, 2592 is 864 times 3, I believe. It's divisible by 108 and 144. Let me look at that. 2592 divided by 3 is 864. The foundation of time number. 2592. All right. It's a golden proportion number. From 537 BC post-exilic. This is 2160. This is the Greek Syrian Seleucid calendar. 2,160 years. It is 1584 of the Egyptian Coptic, Christian Coptic calendar, 792 plus 792, the Nemesis system. This is the 72nd year of the United States of America. This is the precessional system. There is a 3-month-long series of earthquakes throughout the Aegean and Mediterranean, damaging much property and killing wildlife, but only about 50 people are reported to have died. The report of gold in California initiated the California Gold Rush, as some 80,000 people began to migrate across the face of North America. The Taiping Rebellion in China began, lasting until 1864. Rising hostilities in Europe again against the papacy of Rome due to invasive assumptions of power prompted the Pope to flee Rome. The sulfur tip safety match was invented in this year. Also in this year, the Jews Karl Marx and Frederick Engels published their Communist Manifesto. This birth of the spirit of communism was a great darkness that would shadow the Israelite descended nations and then the rest of the world for a century and beyond. Karl Marx was descended from Jewish rabbinical families on both sides, paternal and maternal. His real name being Moses Mordecai Levy. The anti-Christian communist movement was created and funded by the Jews. Throughout Europe and the world occurred over 50 political assassinations and revolutions as the monarchies of the world fell to democracies and republics. John Keel wrote that in 1848 was also the start of the Industrial Revolution. Lieutenant William F. Lynch, a military scientist of the United States, conducted the most important study of the Dead Sea conducted to date, performed on behalf of the U.S. Navy. The Dead Sea was originally the Vale of Siddim, the Salt Sea, and in 1849 BC, the area was altered when the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed by fiery detritus from space. As this is the 72nd year of the United States, with people traveling further and further west, as prophesied in the biblical books, we are not surprised to find this is 2592 years after 745 BC, when the 10 tribes of Israel are deported into Assyrian captivity in their migrations, beginning their migrations. The Pope's flight from Rome was 1242 years, or 3 cursed earth periods of 414 years each, divisible by 138. After 606 AD, when he was declared the universal bishop over all Christian bishops. This is the Communist Revolution, 1848. It is divide and conquer. Communism is 100% a Jewish construction. It was designed to infiltrate all the Israelite descended nations. All basically the white European nations that can show their migrations from the Middle East. Judaism and basically Europeans have been at war for like 25, 26 centuries. It's been a war that's been fought under many masks. But beginning in 1848, now communism has toppled the power structures of so many Israelite descended monarchies and begins to infiltrate, and it uses the Industrial Revolution to do it. The tiny hats have been doing this for a very long time. They're very good at it. So this concludes episode 9, which is the 10th in the series because there's a prequel. But this concludes episode 9 of Hats Off series.